meters, 10 feet above the water's surface. This is partially due to their good eyesight. I don't know how we know that. They can't read an eye chart. But also due to their ability to compensate for the refraction of light as it passes through the air-water interface when aiming at their prey. I have no idea how to do that either. They typically spit at prey at a mean angle of about 74 degrees from the horizontal, but can still aim accurately when spitting at angles between 45 and 110 degrees from horizontal. When the archerfish selects its prey, it rotates its eye so that the image of the prey falls on a particular portion of the eye in the ventral temporal periphery of the retina. Say that 3 times. And its lips just break the surface, squirting a jet of water at its victim. Archerfish does this by forming a small groove in the roof of its mouth and tongue into a narrow channel. It then fires by contracting its gill covers and forcing water through this channel. Shooting a stream shaped by its mouth parts travels faster at the rear than at the front. So it's a stream, but the water in the back is going faster than the water that initially got shot. This speed differential causes a stream to become a blob directly before impact as the slower leading water is overtaken by the faster trailing water. Interestingly enough, it is varied by the fish to account for the distance in range. You notice how to change the velocity. They are persistent, make multiple shots if the first one fails. Young archerfish start shooting at about 1 inch long, but are inaccurate at first and must learn from experience. During this learning period, they hunt in small schools. This way the probability is enhanced that at least one jet will hit its target. A 2006 experimental study, because we have money to study these kind of things, found that archerfish appear to benefit from observational learning by watching and performing group members shoot without having to practice or perform the shooting itself. Coincidence or design?
How does evolution develop all that stuff?
Well, I mean, you think about it. The fish and the insects have to evolve at the same time, otherwise there's nothing to shoot at. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that have to kind of all come together. I don't know how. I don't know. You guys. I just read them.
Where do you get these things?
This one actually Brett found for me. So he sent me a couple of ideas. But yeah, it's just, if you can believe Google, right? Just search Google. There you have it. Okay, prayer request is going around. Brother John is going to lead us in a closing prayer at the end, so if it can make back to him. I understand that Sister Tifa Tiller is expecting stress tests tomorrow, but for now is hospitalized but comfortable. That may or may not be on the prayer list already, so just to let you know that was circulating around. Okay, my clock is gone, so I keep looking at the clock. I'm going to look at my watch. Okay, Brett and I have been covering for James. Brett was last week, and I am the teacher du jour. We are continuing our study of John MacArthur's book, 12 Ordinary Men. James will be back next week, and then he'll have the last 2 weeks of this quarter to finish up the book, and then we'll be moving on. Ramon will actually be teaching in this class starting in April, and he will be doing Genesis, so look for that announcement. I'll get that to Marilyn with her assistants to get that in the bulletin. Okay, anybody got any questions? All right, our author has grouped the 12 apostles into 3 groups. Group 1 was Peter, Andrew, James, and John. So this is a pair of 2 brothers, right? And it's really kind of the expanded inner circle. Peter, James, and John were the inner circle, and then Andrew is just there on the periphery. So it's really the expanded inner circle of friends, closest friends to Jesus. Group 2 was Philip, Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, Thomas, and Matthew. Brett covered Thomas the doubter and Matthew the tax collector last week. So now we're down to our last group of folk. We have James, Simon, Judas, and Judas. This week we're just going to cover Simon the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas, not Iscariot. Judas Iscariot gets his own week. That'll be next week when James is back. So that's where we're going today. Anybody got any thoughts before we go? All right, moving on. So we have James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas, son of James, but also referred to as not Judas Iscariot. They are virtually silent in the gospel narratives and in Acts. Very little is mentioned about them. We'll review some of the verses, but to be honest, some of what we'll talk about is somewhat speculative. We have some early church tradition that tells us a little bit about what that takes place for them. But the bottom line is we just don't know a whole lot about them, but we'll cover what we know. But there was something about them that Jesus saw value in. It probably wasn't something that he saw right away. It was probably something that he saw that they could grow into, or something that they would become. There is one thing that they all had in common, and that's in Luke chapter 18, verses 28. When Peter replied to Jesus, "We have left all we had to follow you." That's the one thing they all had in common. Even Judas Iscariot at the time. They all left everything they had to follow Jesus. That in and of itself is quite an example. Yes, sir?
Yes, it's an example as we look at, I think it's Romans 6:17, when we obey from a sincere heart that form of doctrine which is able to save our souls. That itself is also falls in that category.
Excellent.
We follow that path because we have to deal with family, friends, community. All those things become really it becomes challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, all challenges are opportunities depending on your perspective. Glass is half full or half empty. I tend to be a more half-empty kind of guy, but I'm working on that. Okay, so we're going to start with James, the son of Alphaeus. The only thing that Scripture really tells us about James, the son of Alphaeus, is his name and his family. We do have a little bit of information with regards to his immediate family. If he wrote anything, it didn't survive. The book of James in the New Testament is attributed to Jesus' younger half-brother and early leader of the church in Jerusalem. So if you go looking for James, it isn't this James, it's another James. He was somewhat of an obscure character or apostle. He really did nothing to capture any fame or notice. Even his name is common. Now, how many Jameses are there? There's like a half a dozen or more just in Scripture alone. So even his name is somewhat common. The common, just another one of those ordinary or common guys. Yes, sir.
Matthew is also associated with Alphaeus. Does MacArthur address that, or is that something he just overlooks?
No, he mentions it.
Okay,
but
you may want to keep on with your narrative. I was just
no, it's a
calling
good
attention to
question.
there's a relationship that we often never hear about in the preaching and teaching.
The name's the same in terms of, you're right, Matthew's father is known as Alphaeus. He's known as Matthew, the son of Alphaeus, but he's more known as the tax collector, as is James, son of Alphaeus. They don't, not that Alphaeus was necessarily a very common name, they don't, the author suggests that they were not the same Alphaeus.
There's no relationship.
No relationship.
But the name.
But the name. And the reason being is where we'll go next.
Go there.
Wikipedia thinks they're the same.
Oh, does he?
The Wikipedia thinks James and Matthew are brothers.
Yes, and Wikipedia also thinks that James was written by James, son of Alphaeus, and not necessarily the half-brother of Jesus. So, yeah, you got to kind of pick and choose what you do. But I have a reason, and the author presents this in terms of why he doesn't think Matthew and James, son of Alphaeus, are brothers. So we'll go there next. Next up is going to be Mark chapter 3, verse 18. Get a volunteer to read Mark chapter 3, verse 18.
Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, that is Simon the Canaanite.
There you go. So that's who we get. James, son of Alphaeus. Now we got Mark chapter 15 and verse 40. And I've got that, so I'll read it. Some women, and we'll probably come back to this verse again later on, because we've got to kind of dissect this verse specifically, but we'll start. Some women were watching from a distance. This is at Jesus' crucifixion. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Younger, and of, depending on your translation, Joseph or Joseph. So you might see that in two different translations. So Mary, the mother of James the Younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. So the author suggests that if he were the brother of Matthew, he would have been listed as a brother, just like Joseph and James are listed as brothers in Mark chapter 15, verse 40. So that's the explanation that the author of the book provides. Yes?
Why they don't name Mary Jesus' mother? They didn't say. There's several places they use as a mother of James, but they didn't say the mother of Jesus.
You have to marry that, or you have to combine the multiple scriptures to build the complete story. And I promise you we're going to do that before the end of today. Because we're going to look at the multiple verses that put the women at the crucifixion. So hold on to that thought. We'll get there. I promise. Okay. So what we have is he's considered in Mark chapter 15 verse 40 James the Younger. That'd be the NIV and the ESV. It might be in the New King James Version James the Less. Just toss that out. There's a couple of different ways that comes out. The son of Alphaeus, and his mother's name was Mary, and he had a brother named Joseph. That again is in the NIV or the ESV. It might say Joses, Joses, Jose, I suppose, if it's Spanish, but I don't think it's Spanish. So I'll just go with Joseph in the New King James Version, or in an early version of the NIV, it might say that as well. So his mother was also a follower of Jesus. She was an eyewitness to the resurrection. She was part of the women to go to the tomb later after the Sabbath. And she's from Galilee, and among the women that followed Jesus and supported him and his needs. She was a very close follower of Jesus, and that would have been James, son of Alphaeus, his mother. So she was a devout follower of Christ. And again, he has a brother named Joseph, and a brother named Matthew is absent in this reference. So that's, again, that's the reason for not making a connection between the two Alphaeuses, although the name is the same.
David, is this saying that Salome is his sister?
No, Salome is the mother of James and John, Zebedee's
Okay, yeah.
Zebedee's
Yeah, you're right.
wife. We're going to keep all them straight. We're going to keep all the Marys straight. We're going to get that. There's like 3 Marys in every generation of my family. I can't just whatever. James the Younger. So this one might have been to distinguish him from James the son of Zebedee. Possible. If so, that puts James the Younger as perhaps one of the younger of the disciples, more like John's age. And we know John was probably the youngest, hence living the longest. But he was also the one that Jesus loved, which also contributed to his long life. But James is potentially younger than James, son of Zebedee, and therefore is nicknamed James the Younger. James the Less could refer to his height, because that is literally translated Little James. Unless it's Robin Hood and Little James is but it's possible it was a reflection of his height. To tell you the truth, I don't have the Hebrew to determine whether James the Less or James the Younger is a more accurate translation to English. I'd have to ask Mark when he gets back, and I can do that if someone's really interested. But I'm gonna go with Younger, James the Younger, and that he is younger than James, the son of Zebedee.
Yeah, my disciples' literal New Testament, which gets down to the real literal, says James the little, footnote says that is small or young. So still.
Could be a toss-up.
Still debatable.
Still debatable, there you go. Okay, here's where it gets a little cloudy. Let's see, I gotta get caught up. James the younger, James the less, a possible cousin to Jesus. This is where, like I said, it gets a little muddy. And what we need to do is compare two verses. Mark chapter 15, verse 40, which we just read. And we also need to put a thumb on John chapter 19, verse 25. So, here we go. In Mark chapter 15, verse 40, we have Mary Magdalene. We do not necessarily have Mary, the mother of Jesus. But we do have Mary Magdalene, because it says, from a distance, among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome, who's the wife of Zebedee. So these women had followed Jesus and cared for his needs in Galilee. That's Mark chapter 15, verse 40. So here we have definitely Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, for sure. Ignore the first line. That's a clip copy error, my bad. Okay, everybody with me? Get out of the way so you can see. All right, next we have John chapter 19 and verse, I have 25. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, another Mary, makes it real convenient. His mother's sister, comma, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. So we got a couple of Marys. So on the slide, we've got Mary the mother of Jesus for sure, Mary Magdalene for sure, and then we have Mary the wife of Clopas. Everybody with me? Yes. So the question is there four Marys? Because we have Mary the mother of James and Mary the wife of Clopas. There's either four Marys or they're the same.
Mary James is mother of Jesus. Because his brother name was James.
That's true, but in Mark chapter 15, verse 40, it says, Mary, the mother of James the younger, and Joseph. So it's not going to be James the younger. I suppose you could say, you're right, now that I think about it, you're right, that could be the Mary, the mother of Jesus. The author doesn't suggest that's the way it's written. But if you want to buy into there are just three Marys, then Mary, the wife of Clopas, has to be Mary, the wife of Alphaeus. And Alphaeus and Clopas is the same person. One's a nickname. Possible. And because of John chapter 19, verse 25, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, that's Jesus' mother Mary, his mother's sister, comma, Mary, the mother of Clopas. There's a lot of commas. But I suppose it's possible that Clopas is Joseph, Jesus' father, earthly father. That's his brother. And if that's the case, that would put Mary, the wife of Clopas, as Mary's sister. And then the cousins of Jesus would be James and Joseph. I don't know. It seems like a lot of different connections. But the author spends a fair amount of time trying to lay this out. And so I've spent a little bit of time trying to lay this out. I'm not so sure, because that requires a lot of steps and a couple of commas that probably don't exist in the original Hebrew. You have to kind of pick and choose where you're at. But hence it's a question mark. Is he a Is James, the son of Alphaeus, a possible cousin of Jesus? It's possible. But again, there's more than one way to read it, as we've seen. Anybody got any further questions to dig this hole any deeper?
Only a brief one.
Sure.
Years and years ago, there was a senior elderly disciple in the Bible class that I attended. She would often put her hand up and say, "Teacher, do I need to understand this in order to go to heaven?"
Nope, you don't.
And often the answer is, "No, sister, you don't need that. You'll be fine."
This makes for some interesting discussion and a couple of different ways to think about things. Is it critical? No, it's not critical. But it tries to give us an idea of the real relationships. This was a pretty small group of individuals. Jesus chose 11 of the original 12, all from Galilee. Only Judas Iscariot is not from Galilee. And so this is a small region. We're probably talking the size of like Maryland or Delaware. This is not a very large region, and they're all from the Jewish community. They ran in a rather small circle. Yes, ma'am.
It may not determine if we go to heaven or not, but a lot of times people take scriptures out of context, and they're still doing the same thing with names, and so it helps us to understand who they're talking to and whom they're talking about.
It does. It gives us a little bit of a perspective, and it gives us the opportunity to defend our faith. Yeah, you're right. There is a possibility of this intertwining, but you know what? It really isn't stated.
You're right.
And we can defend that position, because what we want to do is be able to defend the accuracy of the word when it comes time to being a valuable and authentic Christian when we're talking to others. I'm sorry?
Apologetic.
Very good. Okay. Church tradition. Nothing else? We said it's a possibility. And I said early on, a lot of the things that we talk about are somewhat speculative. But you have to really kind of delve in, and maybe another translation would present things a little bit differently. Again, commas weren't necessarily a part of the original Hebrew or Greek. Church tradition. Church tradition has James, the son of Alphaeus, taking the gospel to Syria and Persia, martyred by unknown method. Multiple church traditions suggest stoning, beaten to death, or crucified. Those are there probably aren't very many more options associated with being martyred. But again, we don't have a definitive list. Any questions with regards to James, son of Alphaeus? All right. Simon the Zealot. In Luke chapter 6, verse 15, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who is called the Zealot. If you read Matthew chapter 10, verse 4, or Mark chapter 3, verse 18, the New King James Version may say Simon the Canaanite 1A, not 2 A's. That would not be a reference to the land of Canaan. It would be a reference to the Hebrew word meaning to be zealous. Zealots were a political party who hated the Romans and Roman rule. Religiously, they aligned somewhat with the Pharisees in terms of the authority of the law, but took it further that God is their only true leader and Lord, and supporting Roman rule was treason against God. First century Jewish Roman historian Josephus writes that a revolt by the zealous against the Romans over an imposed census tax in 6 AD. Once the rebellion was squashed, the zealot leader was murdered along with all his sons. The zealots then went underground and were more secretive. By the time of Jesus' ministry, the zealots were a well-known and widely feared outlaw political sect to which Simon was apparently a member. Interesting selection for an apostle. They were extremist, militant, and violent outlaws, believing they were doing God's work by assassinating Roman soldiers, political leaders, and anyone, even Jews, who opposed them.
Yeah, I mean, we got to remember now, Peter took a sword
Yep,
and cut the Hebrew, the temple guard,
that's true.
he cut his ear off, and Jesus healed and put it back on, so aggression was and we got to look at the 400 years of silence of God from the Old Testament to the New, and the Maccabees.
The Maccabees, and then the
They
Zealots
were
likely evolved
From
from the Maccabees, from the
Yes.
first century pieces.
Very aggressive.
They were. Many historians believe that when the Romans ransacked Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Roman complete destruction of Jerusalem was in large part due to the Zealots. As the siege was underway, Zealots began killing their fellow Jews who wanted to negotiate with Rome to end the siege. They were looking for a Messiah who would lead the overthrow of Roman rule and restore the original kingdom's glory under Solomon. That's what they were looking for. That's what they were hoping to find. It is probably this hope in the Messiah that brings Simon to Jesus. We kind of know, John the Baptist says, he's the guy.
That's right.
And so Simon probably hears that and says, oh, the guy that's coming to restore the kingdom, I need to follow him. That's probably the original motivation behind Simon following Jesus. All the disciples looked for the restoration of the earthly kingdom. They all kind of fell victim to that. But Simon was ready to kill and be killed for it. He took it zealously. Can we imagine how well Matthew the tax collector and Simon got along? I look at Da Vinci's famous Last Supper and I see Matthew over here and I see Simon over there. Opposite sides of the kingdom. There was probably a time in Simon's life where he would have killed Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. He was a Jew and he collected money for the Romans. There was a time probably any zealot would have taken an opportunity to kill him. In Matthew's gospel, in the list of the 12 disciples in Matthew chapter 10 verse 4, he lists Simon the Zealot next to last, right before Judas Iscariot. There you go. The author suggests that when Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2, in the list following Matthew chapter 10 verse 4, starting in verse 5 and following, Simon and Judas Iscariot were probably paired together. They are listed last, 11 and 12. That's a freebie. I don't think we have any real evidence to suggest that, but certainly possible because they probably got along. They probably thought similar. They came to Jesus with the hope of Simon the traitor is expecting to get rich on the deal. Simon the Zealot is looking for the restoration of the original nation and religion of Israel. Yes.
I don't know, we could look at David and Joab, the hitman, that's what I call him.
Yeah.
He was an outright hitman, and him and David was close.
Yeah.
And so we look and find that now. I'm trying to think of our modern day and it's mostly Mohammedanism. What do we call them?
Muslims?
Muslim?
Muslim, but it's the parties of the Muslim. All
Jihadists.
Muslims-
Jihadists.
Jihad. There you go. So wherever I had a singing moment. So when we look at these kind of things, these affiliations, you see where God told David, you got too much blood on your hands. As we look at our affiliations too, and how far people are going to go, and whether we view them as being, because we're Christians today, but Christians taking up guns and being militarized, I put it that way. How far do we go? It's something to think about as we look at our relationships with others within the family and helping us stay together as looking at what the life of Jesus really gives us in sacrificial aspects of what we do by example. I think it's something that we could, entertain.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that these examples do give us are examples of exactly the type of behavior we see today. And it comes down to how are we going to act and how are we going to respond as Christians in the 21st century.
Well, like, we know there are examples of people bombing abortion clinics in the name of
Exactly.
Christianity.
These guys thought that supporting Roman rule was being a traitor against God, and they believed it
Yep.
with all their heart. There's another guy we're going to talk about in a minute.
Who did you say the two were that were paired together with the Simon the Zealot?
The suggestion by the author is Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot.
Okay.
Again, Judas Iscariot hoping to profit from Jesus' return to earthly rule and his kingdom. Simon has a slightly different perspective. He's looking to restore the original glory of the nation and the religion of Israel. Okay, what else we got? So why does Jesus pick a guy like Simon?
He saw something of value in him.
He saw something of value. He saw something of value in everybody.
That's right.
And that's an example for who?
For all of
For all
us.
of us. There's something of
I
value.
see parallels with Paul.
Sure.
Now, hold on to that thought.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But God Jesus was able to look and see that there's value in him and that he has something to contribute.
Sure.
Matthew records Jesus saying in 10:28 that then and now we're not to fear the one who, after killing you, can do nothing more.
Sure.
They've done all they can do, and that was Simon here. But the other thing that he adds to that verse is fear the one you should fear is the one who, after putting you to death, has the power to cast you into Gehenna.
Sure.
That's the Heavenly Father. Another unique way of thinking about this, imagine Jesus pairing Matthew, the tax collector, with Simon the Zealot, because they both rethought their positions, and Simon is now going to put his sword away, and Matthew is going to put away his tax collecting, and then they team up and be apostles together. Uniquely, Jesus does uniquely different things and thinks differently than we do.
He does.
Is a point that I'm making.
Fair enough. I'm gonna suggest that as early as Matthew 10, they're not that close. I don't think they get that close until the cross.
Sure.
But that's just what I think. I don't think the change has happened yet.
The other thing God sees, Jesus sees, is a potential, the ability to change into what he really wants over time.
He is a passionate, zealous, loyal, and courageous fighter for a misunderstood cause. And that's the passion, the loyalty, the zealous, courageous man, when confronted with Jesus, redirects all of those positive attributes into something that can spread the gospel. Not much different than Saul. Saul was a dedicated, educated, zealous Pharisee. And he took all of those positive attributes and became an apostle at a later date. Church tradition takes the gospel, Simon takes the gospel as far as the British Isles. We don't know for sure. Like others, Simon disappears from the biblical record after the crucifixion and Jesus is raised or goes to heaven. Tradition says he was martyred for preaching the gospel. We would expect nothing less. He started as a fierce and passionate man willing to die for Judea and its for a political agenda. Instead, he gives his life to Jesus, preaching the gospel to others, probably Gentiles, probably not his fellow countrymen, if he went as far as the British Isles, in order that they may be saved. That, wrong button. Okay, next we have Judas, son of James, not Iscariot. Pick a name. There's lots of names for Judas, the son of James. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 3, Matthew chapter 10, verse 3, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. NIV and ESV will say Thaddeus there in Matthew chapter 10, verse 3. New King James may say Lebbaeus, whose surname is Thaddeus. There's also a footnote in the ESV study Bible referencing some manuscripts with the same reference. Luke chapter 6, verse 16, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So Judas is known also as the son of James from Luke. And then finally in John chapter 14, verse 22, then Judas, not Judas Iscariot, goes on to ask a question of Jesus. And so those are the different names. Judas is likely his name given at birth. Likely. It means praised, which is a rather noble definition for a name. Unfortunately, Judas has become somewhat tainted due to the other Judas, Judas Iscariot. The negative connotation that precedes the name, Judas kind of falls into that category. Lebbaeus and Thaddeus are likely nicknames. Thaddeus means breast child, possibly the youngest in his family, and a result of potentially over-cherished child by his mother, having their last child. Just a suggestion. Lebbaeus means heart child. Both nicknames suggest a gentle soul or tender childlike heart-minded personality. There's only one dialogue that's recorded involving Judas, not Iscariot, and that's in John chapter 14, verses 18 through 21. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is where earlier in chapter 14, Philip goes, well, Jesus, if you just show us the Father, then we'll understand. And Jesus' response is somewhat of a rebuke. You mean after all this time, Philip, you don't know me? And then later in the same chapter, we have Judas, not Iscariot, ask Jesus the question, but Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not the world? And Jesus takes a little different approach or response to Judas. More like, that's not a bad question. That's a good question. This one about showing me the Father, that's not a good question. So maybe Judas was on the right track.
You know, you began with a lot of interesting information at the start of the class. If you notice on your screen up there, you say Judas, son of James. Another way to say that is Judas Jameson. And Mark Jameson might be really excited about that.
Yeah. I'm not going there.
Nevertheless, Judas Jameson.
Okay, so we have, we've got just a couple minutes. There's a little bit more information I want to go through. Let's see, what do we got? So Jesus' response to him is a little gentler. He's not going to take over the world with an earthly kingdom. That's what the apostles were looking for.
That's right.
I'm going to rule the world, this world, with an earthly kingdom. That's not where Jesus was going.
There's still people who like to believe that.
There's still.
Yeah.
Jesus was going to take over not the world, but people's hearts. One at a time. What Jesus does not say in his response is that he expects his apostles to be the witnesses to kickstart winning over people's hearts and add them to his spiritual kingdom, the New Testament church for which he has said. He is going to reveal himself to the world. He's going to reveal himself to the world. First the apostles, and then us. That's how he reveals himself to the world. Church tradition suggests he takes the gospel to Edessa, a royal city in Mesopotamia, which is now in modern Turkey. There are numerous ancient accounts in which Judas heals the king of Edessa, a guy named Abgar. Tradition symbol for Judas is a club because tradition says he was clubbed to death for his faith. The big finish. We have the last group of four. We have a younger guy, probably, in James, the son of Alphaeus, and possibly, long stretch, cousin to Jesus. We have a zealot. We have a gentle, tender soul like Judas, son of James. and we have a traitor in Judas Iscariot. Jesus chose a rather diverse group of guys. And that doesn't include the first 8 or the first 2 groups of 4. Scripture does not provide a biological portrait of any of the Gospels. We get a lot of information on Paul because of Acts, but that's it. There are some scriptures that give us some insight to early church tradition, but it's still somewhat speculative, as we've suggested all along, in terms of what the individual apostles did beyond what is specifically in Scripture. We would like to have more details. It'd be nice to have more information, but we don't have it. And we don't need it. Because the church isn't about the apostles. The church is about Jesus.
If we had that detail, we'd be worshiping him.
There you go. So there's a couple of examples that we can look. I got quarter after? All right, I got 2 minutes. John chapter 1, verses 49 through 50. This is Jesus speaking to Nathanael and back. Then Nathanael, or Bartholomew, declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you what you did under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that." That's right. And then in John chapter 14, verse 12, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these." We may not know what the 12 apostles did after the crucifixion, but we know Jesus prophesied. He said they were going to do greater things than them. They're definitely examples for us in our Christian walk. Last comments before I turn over to Brother John. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That's all right.